September 14th, 1942. Volga River, dawn. The city ahead burned like the mouth of hell. I remember that morning with the clarity only terror brings. The way the river moved beneath our boats, black water catching reflections of orange fire from the city ahead. Stalingrad. We'd heard the name whispered in the replacement depots, spoken like a curse or a prayer, depending on who said it. Now here we were, packed into wooden boats like cattle, rowing toward what looked like the end of the world. The 13th Guards Rifle Division. That's what they called us now. Guards. As if a title could make us bulletproof. Most of us were barely old enough to shave properly, pulled from villages across the motherland and given rifles that still smelled of cosmoline. The man next to me couldn't stop his hands from shaking as he gripped his oar. His name was Mikhail, farm boy from outside Moscow. He'd told me about his mother's borscht the night before, how she'd make it with extra beets when the harvest was good. "If we make it across," someone muttered from the bow, voice barely carrying over the splash of oars, "we'll live forever." "Shut up," came the sergeant's reply. Sharp, final. "Save your breath for rowing." But I understood what he meant. There was something about that crossing that felt like passing through a gate between worlds. Behind us, the eastern bank still held some pretense of sanity. Field kitchens, ammunition dumps, medics preparing bandages with steady hands. Ahead, the city burned and burned, smoke rising in columns that twisted together into a black ceiling that blocked out the dawn. The Stukas found us halfway across. You hear them before you see them. That scream they make when they dive. Like the sky itself is being torn apart. The first bombs hit the water 20 meters to our left, and the river erupted. The boat lurched, cold spray mixing with something warmer. Blood from someone who'd caught shrapnel. No time to see who. "Keep rowing." The sergeant's voice cut through the chaos. "Don't stop rowing." Artillery joined in from the German positions. The shells whistled overhead, each one a lottery ticket with our names on it. A boat to our right took a direct hit and simply ceased to exist. One moment men and wood and rifles, the next just spreading rings in the black water. I pulled harder on my oar, muscles burning, trying not to think about how we must look from shore. Slow-moving targets in a shooting gallery. The city grew larger, revealing itself through the smoke. What had been apartments and factories and schools was now a landscape of broken teeth. Jagged walls standing alone, steel beams twisted into shapes that hurt to look at. Fires burned in the skeletal remains of buildings, some of them 5 or 6 stories of pure flame. The air itself seemed to shimmer with heat, even from here, even with the cold river spray soaking through our uniforms. "Motherland needs you," the commissar had told us the night before. Stalingrad must not fall. Looking at it now, I wondered if it hadn't fallen already. How do you defend rubble? How do you hold a line in hell? A shell exploded behind us, close enough that the blast wave pushed our boat forward. Someone was praying, old words his grandmother probably taught him, words that seemed too small for this morning. Another man was crying, but silently, tears mixing with river spray on his face. No shame in it. We were all afraid. The brave ones were just better at hiding it. The western bank rushed toward us now, and I could make out figures moving in the ruins. Our people, what was left of the units already there. They looked like ghosts, gray with dust and ash, moving between the skeletal buildings. Some of them were dragging wounded. Others were running ammunition to positions we couldn't see. All of them had the same look, hollow eyes that had seen too much. "Get ready." The sergeant was checking his PPSH submachine gun, working the bolt. The moment we hit shore, you run. You find cover. You don't stop for anything or anyone. Clear?" We grunted acknowledgement. What else was there to say? The bottom of the boat scraped against something, not shore, but the wreckage of another boat. One that hadn't made it all the way. We were 5 meters from the bank when the German machine guns opened up. The sound was distinctive, the rapid rip of MG-42s. So fast the individual shots blurred together. Bullets slapped into the water around us, kicked splinters from the boat's sides. "Move! Move! Move!" We went over the sides, into water that was waist-deep and shocking cold. I pushed forward, rifle held high, legs fighting against the current and the mud that tried to suck my boots off. Men fell around me, some crying out, some just folding silently into the water. I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The sergeant's words echoed. Don't stop for anything or anyone. The bank was a tangle of debris, concrete chunks, twisted metal, bodies from previous crossings. I threw myself behind a fallen wall section just as bullets sparked off the concrete where I'd been standing. My chest heaved, lungs burning from the run and the smoke that was everywhere now, thick and acrid. "Welcome to Stalingrad," a voice said. I turned to see a lieutenant, his uniform so filthy I couldn't make out his rank insignia. Half his face was bandaged, the white gauze already gray with ash. He was smiling, but it was the smile of a man who'd forgotten what humor actually was. "Don't get too comfortable," he continued, checking his rifle. "Comfort's been dead a while here." Before I could respond, someone shouted from ahead, "Tanks! German tanks moving on the tractor factory." The lieutenant's smile vanished. He grabbed my shoulder, fingers digging in hard. "You with the 13th Guards?" "Yes, Comrade Lieutenant." "Then you're going to the factory." "Rodimtsev's orders." He pointed north, toward a complex of buildings that looked more like ancient ruins than anything built by human hands. "Hold the factory, whatever it costs." The dash to the Red October factory was 300 meters of pure terror. We ran in groups of 5 or 6, sprinting between chunks of rubble while German snipers tried to pick us off from the upper floors of destroyed buildings. The man running next to me, I never learned his name, made it 20 meters before his head snapped back and he crumpled. No dramatic fall, no last words. Just there one moment, gone the next. "Don't stop for the dead," someone shouted. An officer maybe, or just someone who'd been here long enough to know the rules. The factory loomed ahead, its massive walls pocked with shell holes, windows blown out, roof partially caved in. Smoke poured from fires somewhere deep inside. It had been beautiful once, I think. One of those monuments to Soviet industry, all clean lines and powerful angles. Now it looked like a skull, empty sockets staring at nothing. We made it to a loading dock and tumbled through, gasping. The inside was worse than the outside. Machinery lay twisted and overturned. Conveyor belts hung like dead snakes from the ceiling. Bodies were everywhere, ours, theirs, some so burned you couldn't tell which was which. The smell hit me then, really hit me, cordite and blood and something else, something sweet and wrong that I'd learned was what human flesh smells like when it burns. You, new arrivals. A sergeant appeared from behind an overturned lathe. His arm was in a sling, blood seeping through the bandage. Spread out along the windows, German infantry coming with tank support. "Where's our anti-tank weapons?" Mikhail asked. He'd made the crossing after all, still clutching his rifle like it might float away. The sergeant laughed, bitter and short. "You're looking at them." He held up a bottle filled with clear liquid, a rag stuffed in the neck. "Molotov cocktails. Aim for the engine blocks if they get close enough." "If they get close enough." which meant letting tanks get within throwing distance, which meant the ground shook. Plaster dust drifted from the ceiling like snow. Through the broken windows, we could hear them. The grinding, squealing sound of tank tracks on rubble. Then voices, German voices, calm and professional. They weren't screaming or charging. They were advancing methodically, using the tanks as cover. "Hold your fire until you see them," the sergeant ordered. "Ammunition is worth more than your lives here. Every bullet has to count." I found a position at a window, propping my rifle on the sill. My hands were steadier now. Strange how terror can circle back around to something like calm when there's nowhere left to run. Through my rifle sights, I could see them coming. Gray uniforms moving between the ruins, keeping low, professional. Behind them, the dark bulk of a Panzer IV, its guns sweeping back and forth like the head of some prehistoric beast. 300 meters, someone whispered. We waited. My finger rested on the trigger guard, not the trigger itself. The way they'd taught us in training, though training seemed like something from another lifetime now. A lifetime where targets didn't shoot back, where the ground didn't shake from explosions, where your mouth didn't taste like ash all the time. 200 meters. I could see faces now. One German looked young, maybe younger than me. Blonde hair visible beneath his helmet. He was talking to the man next to him, maybe making a joke. They looked relaxed, confident. Why shouldn't they be? They had tanks. We had bottles full of gasoline. 100 meters. Fire! The factory erupted. Rifles, submachine guns, the occasional bark of a heavy machine gun we'd dragged up to the second floor. The Germans scattered, diving for cover. But some didn't make it. The blonde soldier spun and fell, clutching his chest. His friend tried to drag him to safety, but caught a bullet in the leg and went down too. The tank's turrets swung toward us. I had just enough time to think this is it before the world exploded. The 75mm shell punched through the wall like it was paper. The concussion knocked me backward, ears ringing, vision starred with lights. Chunks of concrete rained down. Someone was screaming. When I pushed myself up, blood running from my nose, I saw that the position to my left simply wasn't there anymore. Just a hole in the wall and empty air. Keep firing. The sergeant was still alive somehow, still giving orders even as blood ran down his face. Don't let them use the tank as cover. But they were already adapting, using our own rubble against us, advancing in short rushes while the tanks suppressed our positions. A Molotov cocktail arced out from a window above, trailing flame, but fell short, exploding harmlessly against the tank's frontal armor. They were 50 meters away now. Close enough that I could see the determination in their faces, the same desperation we felt. This wasn't about glory or ideology anymore. This was about the next 5 minutes, the next 5 seconds, staying alive just a little longer. A German with a flamethrower appeared from behind the tank. Down! Everyone down! The stream of fire hit the windows above us, liquid flame pouring into the factory like water from a broken dam. The screaming started again, different this time, high and terrible, the sound humans make when they're burning alive. Men threw themselves from the second floor rather than burn, hitting the concrete with sounds I still hear in nightmares. We fell back deeper into the factory. Fire spreading behind us, smoke so thick we could barely see 3 meters ahead. The Germans pushed in through the breach their tank had made, and suddenly it was close quarters fighting. Bayonets and entrenching tools and bare hands. I shot a German at point-blank range, so close the muzzle flash burned his uniform. Another came at me with a bayonet, and I swung my rifle like a club, catching him in the jaw, feeling bone break under the impact. The basement, someone yelled. "Fall back to the basement." We retreated down metal stairs that rang with ricochets into darkness that smelled of machine oil and fear. Above us, the factory burned, and through the flames we could hear the Germans consolidating, setting up positions, radioing for reinforcements. "How many made it?" the sergeant asked, trying to count shadows in the dark. 15, someone answered. Maybe 20. Out of the 60 who'd entered the factory. "Good," the sergeant said, and I wondered if he'd lost his mind. 20 heroes can hold a basement longer than 60 cowards. But we weren't heroes. We were just boys who didn't want to die in a basement in Stalingrad. Above us, the flames crackled and German boots moved across the floor. They'd be coming for us soon. They had to. And we'd fight them because what else was there to do? Where else was there to go? Mikhail was next to me. His farm boy face streaked with soot and blood. Not his blood, I realized, but from the man who'd been standing next to him when the shell hit. "Still thinking about your mother's borscht?" I asked him. He tried to smile. "No. Now I'm thinking about her voice, the way she'd sing while cooking." I understood. When death gets this close, you don't think about things. You think about people, voices, faces, all the small moments that make up a life, that prove you existed before this basement, before this war. "Get ready," the sergeant whispered. "They're coming." The basement of the Red October factory became our world. 3 days. That's how long we held them at the stairs. 3 days that felt like 3 years. Time measured not in hours, but in ammunition counts and the spaces between explosions. The Germans would probe our defenses, we'd drive them back, they'd shell us, we'd dig deeper into the rubble. A rhythm developed, almost like a horrible dance where both partners knew the steps, but kept dancing anyway. By the second day, we were down to 12 men. Dysentery had started. One of those details about war they don't put in the propaganda films. Men shitting themselves to death while trying to hold a position. The sergeant shot a man who tried to surrender, walked right up to him as he was climbing the stairs with his hands up, and put a bullet in the back of his head. "Anyone else feeling collaborative?" he asked, turning to face us. Nobody answered. We just went back to our positions, stepping over the body. The factory above us had partially collapsed, sealing some entrances but opening others. We could hear German voices through the gaps, sometimes so close it seemed like they were in the room with us. Once, I found myself separated from the others by just a wall of rubble, listening to 2 Germans talking about football while I held a grenade with a pin pulled, ready to take us all if they found the gap I was guarding. They didn't find it. They moved on. I put the pin back in the grenade with hands that shook so badly it took 3 tries. Water became currency. We had 2 canteens between us, and every drop was rationed. Food was whatever we could find. A can of meat that might have been horse, might have been dog, might have been something else. Mikhail found some sugar cubes in a dead officer's pocket, and we sat there in the dark, letting them dissolve on our tongues like children with candy, while above us the factory burned and burned. "I had a girl," one of the soldiers said into the darkness. We never used names anymore. What was the point? "Back in Leningrad. Red hair. Greenest eyes you ever saw." "What happened?" someone asked. "I got drafted. She got evacuated." End of story. That was everyone's story, really. Lives interrupted, futures canceled, everything that mattered compressed down to this basement, these few meters of rubble and darkness. On the 3rd day, something changed. The German attacks stopped. We waited, fingers on triggers, expecting a trick. But hours passed with only distant gunfire, like thunder from a storm that might or might not reach us. Then we heard Russian voices above, calling out unit names, passwords. "Down here," the sergeant shouted. "13th Guards." They pulled us out one by one, blinking in the light like moles. The factory was unrecognizable. What had been a building was now a landscape. Hills of rubble, valleys of twisted metal, forests of rebar jutting from concrete like dead trees. Bodies everywhere. So many that they'd become part of the terrain, things to step over or around without thinking. The lieutenant who greeted us looked at our 12 filthy, half-dead survivors and nodded like we'd accomplished something. "Good work," he said. The factory held. The factory held. As if the factory mattered. As if these ruins were worth the boys who'd never see their mothers again, never finish school, never kiss their girls. But I was beginning to understand that it wasn't about the factory. It was about the fact that we'd held it. The Germans had thrown everything at us, and we were still here, still fighting from our holes like rats that refused to die. "New orders," the lieutenant continued. "You're being moved to the apartment blocks, southern sector. The Germans are pushing hard there." The sergeant laughed, a sound like grinding glass. "Apartment blocks, luxury accommodations." But when we got there, I understood his bitter humor. The apartment blocks were just more ruins, but vertical ones. 5 or 6 stories of broken homes stacked on top of each other. We could move between floors through holes blown in the ceilings, crawl between apartments through gaps in the walls. It was 3-dimensional warfare, fighting above and below and beside all at once. They assigned us to the 3rd floor of Building 6. It had been someone's home once. There were still pictures on one wall. A family, parents, and 2 children, smiling at a photographer who'd never imagined this. The glass was cracked across the father's face. I turned the photo to face the wall. I didn't want them watching what we were about to do to their home. We knocked out what was left of the windows, set up firing positions, dragged furniture to make barricades. Professional now. Efficient. We'd learned things in that basement that training never taught us. Like how hunger sharpens your hearing. Like how to tell from the sound whether incoming artillery is going to hit your building or the one next door. Like how to sleep standing up with your finger on the trigger. "Movement," Mikhail whispered. He'd survived the factory somehow. We all had our stories of somehow. 2nd floor, building across the street. I looked through my rifle scope. Germans setting up a machine gun position. They moved differently now, I noticed. Less confident, more careful. They'd learned things too, fighting us. Learned that every pile of rubble could hide a sniper. Every basement could become a fortress. Every Russian who should have been dead might suddenly throw a grenade. "Let them set up," the sergeant ordered. "We hit them when they think they're safe." We waited. Patience was another thing we'd learned. How to be still for hours, breathing shallow, moving nothing but our eyes. The Germans got their machine gun assembled, started scanning for targets. One of them lit a cigarette, a mistake that would cost him. Now, we fired together, our volley catching them in the open. The smoker fell backward, cigarette still in his mouth. Another tried to swing the machine gun toward us, but caught 2 bullets in the chest. The survivors scrambled for cover, leaving their weapon behind. For a moment, there was silence. Then the building shook as a tank shell hit 2 floors below us. Plaster rained from the ceiling. Through the hole in the floor, I could see fire spreading in the apartment below. "They're coming," someone said unnecessarily. We could all hear the boots on the stairs, the harsh breathing of men preparing to kill or be killed. I pulled the pin on my last grenade, held it for 2 seconds, another lesson learned, cook them off so the enemy can't throw them back, and tossed it down the stairwell. The explosion shook dust from everything, and the boots stopped coming. "For now, how much ammunition?" the sergeant asked. We counted bullets like misers counting coins. 43 rounds between us, 2 grenades, 3 Molotov cocktails that might or might not light. The gasoline was mixed with motor oil, whatever we could find that would burn. "Make them count," he said. "Every bullet a German. Every German a step closer to—" He never finished. A sniper's bullet caught him in the throat, spinning him around. He fell against the wall with the family photo, blood spreading across the cracked faces. He tried to speak, bubbles forming on his lips, then slid down to sit on the floor. His eyes stayed open, staring at something none of us could see. Mikhail moved to close them, but I stopped him. "Leave them," I said. "Let him watch. Let him see we're still here." It was bravado, false courage. But what else did we have? We were boys playing at being soldiers, pretending we weren't terrified, pretending the sergeant's death didn't mean we were even more alone than before. But sometimes pretending is enough. Sometimes it's all you have. The Germans came again as the sun set, turning the ruins gold and red. We fought them in the stairwell, in the hallways, room to room. A German burst through a hole in the wall, and I killed him with the sergeant's knife because I was out of ammunition. His blood was hot on my hands, and he looked surprised, like he couldn't believe this was how it ended. When full darkness came, we were down to 7 men, pushed back to a single room. Below us, the building burned. Above us, Germans prepared for a final assault. We had 6 bullets, no grenades, and no way out. "I want my mother," someone said in the darkness. Not ashamed, not crying, just stating a fact. "We all do," I replied. And we waited for dawn, or death, or deliverance. Whichever came first. The radio crackled to life just before dawn. The first time we'd heard anything but static in 2 days. "All units, southern sector. Major counteroffensive beginning at 0600. Hold your positions. Repeat, hold your positions." Hold your positions, as if we had anywhere else to go. The room we'd been pushed back to was 3 meters by 4 meters, had 1 window mostly blocked by rubble, and 2 doorways we'd barricaded with a wardrobe and a kitchen table. 7 of us left, 6 bullets. And outside in the hallway, we could hear the Germans preparing for their final push. But something else too. Distant rumbling, getting closer. Not tanks. I'd learned to distinguish tank engines from trucks, German vehicles from ours. This was our artillery, massing for a barrage. 60 seconds until we're either rescued or buried, Mikhail said. He'd found a piece of paper somewhere and was writing on it with a pencil stub. "Anyone want to leave a note?" "Who'd read it?" someone asked. "I don't know. God, maybe. History. Someone." I thought about that. What would I write? What words could capture this room, this moment, the weight of fear and exhaustion and strange exhilaration that came from still being alive when you shouldn't be? Before I could answer, the barrage began. Hey! If you've never been under heavy artillery, there's no way to describe it that makes sense. It's not just sound. It's physical force, pushing air from your lungs, making your bones vibrate. The building swayed like a tree in a storm. Plaster fell in sheets. Through the window, the world outside turned orange and white. Earth and rubble fountaining up, falling, fountaining again. The Germans in the hallway started screaming. Not battle cries, panic. They knew what this meant. The bombardment would be followed by infantry, tanks, everything the Soviet command could scrape together. And they were on the wrong side of it. A shell hit the floor above us. The ceiling cracked, sagged, held. Another hit the building next door, and the blast wave knocked me to my knees. Someone was laughing. That hysterical laugh that comes when fear goes so far past terror, it comes out the other side as something like joy. Then, suddenly as it began, the shelling stopped. The silence was almost painful. My ears rang with a high, thin note that seemed to come from inside my skull. Through it, gradually, other sounds emerged. Russian voices, shouting commands, the distinctive rattle of our PPSH submachine guns. Boots on stairs, but moving differently now, confidently, advancing rather than creeping. "Here," I shouted, voice cracking. "Third floor, 7 men." The wardrobe blocking one doorway exploded inward, kicked apart by boots. Soviet infantry poured in, led by a captain whose uniform was so clean he must have just arrived from the rear. He looked at us. 7 scarecrows in torn uniforms, covered in dust and blood and other things. And his expression went from military assessment to something like awe. "You held this position for 3 days?" he asked. "Yes, comrade captain," I answered, because someone had to. "With 7 men?" "Started with 20. These are who's left." He was quiet for a moment. Behind him, his men were clearing the building, efficient and fresh and well supplied. Everything we hadn't been. "What unit?" he asked finally. 13th Guards Rifle Division, comrade captain." He nodded slowly. "I'll make sure they know. Make sure it's recorded." Recorded. As if any record could capture what happened in this room, in that basement, in all the forgotten corners of Stalingrad where boys became something else. Not heroes, that word was too clean. But something harder and more necessary. We followed them out, downstairs slippery with blood, past Germans who'd surrendered and Germans who hadn't. Out into a morning that seemed impossibly bright after 3 days in darkness. The city looked different. Not better, still ruins as far as you could see. But the geometry of destruction had changed. Our flags flew from buildings that had been German strongholds. Our tanks sat where their tanks had been. "Transport will take you to the medical station," the captain said. "You're being rotated out." Rotated out. The phrase seemed to belong to a different language, a different world where soldiers went somewhere other than forward, where there was an out to rotate to. But at the medical station, a basement, of course, everything important in Stalingrad happened underground. The doctor took one look at us and laughed. "Rotated out? You're combat effective. 48 hours rest, double rations, then back to the line." Double rations turned out to be 2 cans of meat instead of 1, and bread that was only half sawdust. Rest meant sleeping on the floor instead of standing watch. But for 48 hours, we weren't being shot at. And in Stalingrad, that was luxury. I sat with Mikhail, sharing a cigarette we'd found on a dead German. Neither of us really smoked, but it seemed like something to do with our hands, our mouths, the nervous energy that wouldn't let us be still even in safety. "What did you write?" I asked him. "On that paper, before the barrage." He pulled it out, unfolded it. In shaky pencil, it said, "We were here." That was all. We were here. But looking at it, I understood it was everything. Not we won, or we were brave, or we served the motherland. Just that we existed in that place at that moment. That whatever happened next, we had been real. "It's good," I said. "You think anyone will remember?" he asked. "Any of this?" I thought about the family photo in that apartment, turned to face the wall. the sergeant bleeding out against it, the German boy I'd killed with a knife, his surprised face. All the moments that seemed so enormous from inside them, but were just specks in the larger destruction. "No," I said honestly, "but we will." He folded the paper, put it back in his pocket. That's enough, I suppose. 2 days later, they sent us back. New uniforms that didn't fit right, rifles that still had factory grease on them, and orders to take a grain elevator the Germans had fortified. The captain briefing us spread out a map, pointed to positions, talked about flanking movements and supporting fire. Professional military planning. But I barely listened. I was thinking about something I'd realized in that medical station, something that changed everything and nothing all at once. I'd stopped thinking about after. Before Stalingrad, even in the worst moments, there'd been some part of me that believed in after the war, after this battle, after today. That's what kept you going. The idea that there was something past the present horror. But Stalingrad had burned that out of me, or burned it into something else. There was no after. There was only now, this moment, this breath, this heartbeat, the next 5 minutes, the next 5 seconds. And somehow, that was freedom. When you stop believing in tomorrow, today becomes infinitely precious. Every cigarette might be your last, so you taste every breath of smoke. Every glimpse of sky through the ruins becomes a gift. We weren't fighting for victory anymore. Victory was an abstract concept that belonged to generals and politicians, people who lived in the world of after. We were fighting because the man next to us was fighting. Because the rubble we stood on had been paid for in blood, and we weren't going to sell it cheap. Because the city refused to die, and so did we. "You ready?" Mikhail asked as we moved toward our jump-off positions. "No," I said, remembering that first conversation with the lieutenant who'd welcomed us to Stalingrad. "But that means I'm still human." He smiled, that exhausted smile we'd all developed, equal parts fear and fatalism. "Then let's go be human together." We attacked at dawn, rushing across open ground toward the grain elevator while machine guns turned the air solid with lead. Men fell to my left and right, but I kept running. Not because I was brave, but because stopping meant certain death and moving meant only probable death. I made it to the base of the elevator, pressed myself against the concrete while bullets sparked off the wall inches from my head. Others made it too, not many, but some. Always some. That was Stalingrad's arithmetic. Never everyone, never no one, always some. And we began to climb. The orders came down at midnight, delivered by a runner who looked like he'd crawled through hell to reach us. "Warehouse District 7, German strongpoint. Take it back." The lieutenant, spreading the map on an ammunition crate, had the kind of calm that comes when fear has burned itself out. His finger traced routes through the ruins, tapping positions that might or might not still exist. Maps were fantasies in Stalingrad. Neat lines and grid references for a city that had become formless, shapeless, a geography of destruction that changed with every artillery barrage. "How many men?" someone asked. "Whatever you have." "Ammunition?" "Whatever you have." We looked at each other in the basement's candlelight. 7 of us now. Mikhail had made it through the grain elevator assault, though his left arm hung useless, shrapnel still embedded somewhere near the shoulder. The others were faces I'd learned not to name. Naming made it harder when they stopped moving. "The warehouse has medical supplies," the lieutenant added, like that made it better. "Morphine, bandages, worth more than gold here." Worth dying for, he meant. Everything in Stalingrad was worth dying for. Every basement, every pile of rubble, every burned-out tank. The currency of value had changed. A building wasn't strategic because of what it was, but because we held it. Because they wanted it. Because someone, somewhere, had decided it mattered. We checked our weapons by touch in the darkness. My rifle had 5 rounds. Mikhail had 3. Someone had a captured German grenade, the long-handled kind we called potato mashers. Between us, maybe 20 bullets, and hope that would have been funny if it wasn't our only plan. "When?" the sergeant asked. A new sergeant promoted by virtue of still breathing when his predecessor stopped. "Now." Of course now. It was always now in Stalingrad. No time for fear to build, for doubt to creep in. Just orders and movement and the next impossible thing. We climbed from the basement into a night that glowed orange from fires that never went out. Snow had started falling, not the clean white of winter postcards, but gray stuff that mixed with ash before it hit the ground. It hissed when it landed on hot metal, on beams that were still burning from bombardments days old. The route to the warehouse led through what had been apartment blocks, now just hollow frames standing against the sky like broken teeth. We moved in single file, following the man ahead by sound more than sight, placing our feet where his had been, trusting that if a mine was going to kill us, it would have killed him first. Somewhere to our left, a machine gun opened up. Not at us, at something else. Someone else's war within the war. Tracers arced through the darkness like shooting stars. Beautiful if you forgot what they were. The sound echoed off the ruins, making it impossible to tell distance or direction. Everything in Stalingrad echoed. Sound behaved differently when there were no intact walls to stop it. When every surface was broken, angular, reflecting noise in ways that made your ears lie to you. "Down!" We dropped as mortar rounds walked across our path, each explosion lifting a fountain of debris. The Germans had this section zeroed in, could drop rounds wherever they wanted without even seeing us. We pressed ourselves into the rubble and waited, counting the impacts, waiting for the pattern to break. When it did, we ran. The warehouse loomed out of the smoke sudden and massive, 3 stories of industrial brick that had somehow survived when everything around it hadn't. Dark windows looked down like empty eyes. No lights, no movement. But that didn't mean anything. The Germans were good at waiting too. "Orders don't bleed," someone whispered beside me. "But my friends do." I looked at him, really looked. Boy from Ukraine, maybe 17, with eyes that belonged to someone 3 times his age. He was shaking, not from cold, but from that place past fear where your body starts making its own decisions. "Then we make this quick," I said. "For them." He nodded, gripping his rifle tighter. We all had our reasons for going forward when every instinct screamed to run. Some fought for Stalin, some for the motherland. But in the end, we fought for the man next to us because he was fighting for us, and breaking that chain felt worse than dying. The new sergeant held up his hand. 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. We charged. No battle cry. We'd learned that shouting just told them where to aim. We ran in silence, broken only by our boots on rubble and our breathing, harsh and desperate. The warehouse rushed toward us, growing larger, more solid, more impossible. The first window lit up with muzzle flash. The man to my left folded mid-stride, momentum carrying him forward even as life left him. Another window sparked. Another man fell. We were in the open, 50 meters from the building. No cover, no chance. "The alley!" Mikhail pointed with his good arm. We veered left, those of us still standing, diving into a narrow passage between the warehouse and collapsed storefront. Bullets chipped brick above our heads, showering us with fragments. At the alley's end, a door. Metal, closed, but not locked. We burst through into darkness that smelled of motor oil and something else. Tobacco, food, human warmth. Germans. Close. The fight in that warehouse wasn't war. It was something older, more primitive. We fought with rifles as clubs when ammunition ran out, with knives, with hands and teeth. I remember fragments, the surprise on a German's face when my bayonet found him in the darkness, the sound someone makes when they're strangled, the crash of shelves falling, medical supplies scattering across the floor. A German officer appeared from nowhere, pistol raised. I had one bullet left and I used it, the shot impossibly loud in the enclosed space. He fell backward into boxes marked with red crosses. The medical supplies we'd come for, now splattered with blood. The irony might have meant something if I'd had time to think about it. "Clear," someone shouted, though only 4 of us were left to hear it. We stood there panting in the darkness, surrounded by dead Germans and dead Russians, by medical supplies that could save lives and bodies that proved lives couldn't be saved. The Ukrainian boy was still with us, still shaking, but he'd fought. That was all anyone could ask. "Gather what you can," the sergeant ordered. "We move in 5 minutes." But as we stuffed our pockets with morphine syrettes and bandage rolls, a sound made us freeze. Tank engines, multiple, getting closer. "They're surrounding us," Mikhail said unnecessarily. We could all hear it, feel it through the floor, the vibration of heavy armor moving into position. The sergeant laughed, bitter and short. "Good. Now we know where they are." He started opening crates, looking for something. Found it, German stick grenades, a whole box. Started passing them out like candy to children. "We hold until dawn," he said. "That's 4 hours. 4 hours. In Stalingrad time, that was forever. That was impossible. That was what we were going to do because the alternative was letting them have the medical supplies, and somewhere in the city, wounded men needed morphine more than we needed to live. "For the wounded," the Ukrainian boy said, understanding. "For the wounded," we agreed. Outside, the tank stopped moving. In the silence, we could hear German voices, calm and methodical. They knew we were trapped. They could take their time. I thought about the supplies around us. Bandages that would stop bleeding, morphine that would ease pain, simple things that meant the difference between agony and relief. Worth dying for? In Stalingrad, everything was worth dying for if it meant someone else might live. "They're coming," Mikhail said, pressing his ear to the wall. We took positions at the windows, those of us left, knowing we were outnumbered, outgunned, surrounded. But we were still here, still fighting, still refusing to give them 1 more meter of the city without making them pay for it. The first assault came just before 2 in the morning. We met it with everything we had, which wasn't much. But in Stalingrad, sometimes not much was enough. Sometimes it had to be. The German assault broke like a wave against our position at 03:47 hours. I know because I checked my watch in the muzzle flash, some absurd need to mark the moment we stopped being soldiers and became something else. They came with flamethrowers first. The liquid fire hit the warehouse's ground floor windows in streams that looked like molten gold, beautiful and terrible. The heat reached us on the 2nd floor, sucking oxygen from our lungs, making the air shimmer. Below, something caught. Oil drums, ammunition crates, I never found out. And suddenly, the entire lower level was an inferno. "Up, everyone up." The sergeant was already moving, half dragging the wounded Ukrainian boy toward the stairs leading to the roof. They're going to cook us if we stay. We climbed through smoke so thick it was like swimming through ink. My lungs burned. Someone behind me was coughing so hard they couldn't breathe between spasms. The stairs were metal, already hot enough to feel through our boots. Another minute, and they'd be too hot to touch. We burst onto the roof into a snowstorm that had turned the world white. It was like stepping into a different reality. Below, fire and chaos. Above, snow falling so thick and fast that visibility dropped to maybe 10 meters. The flakes hissed when they hit the hot metal of the roof, turned to steam, rose back up to become snow again in some endless cycle. "Positions!" the sergeant shouted, but the wind tore his words away. We spread out across the roof, 4 men and a boy, peering down into the maelstrom. The snow made everything soft, muffled the explosions, turned the fires below into orange glows that pulsed like dying hearts. For a moment, just a moment, it was almost peaceful. Then the artillery started. Not German artillery, ours. The barrage came from across the Volga. Katyusha rockets screaming overhead like banshees, each one trailing fire through the snow. They hit the streets around the warehouse, walked their way through the German positions, turned the night into a strobe light of detonations. Through the snow, I could see German soldiers scattering, running for cover that didn't exist. "Counteroffensive," Mikhail said, understanding flooding his face. "This is it. The big push." The radio at the sergeant's belt crackled to life, somehow still working, somehow still connected to whatever remained of our command structure. All units. General assault commencing. Fix bayonets and prepare to advance. Repeat, fix bayonets. This is not a drill. Stalingrad stands or falls in the next hour. I looked at my rifle. 2 rounds left. Mikhail's was empty. He was holding it like a club. The Ukrainian boy had lost his weapon somewhere in the warehouse, was clutching a captured German pistol with shaking hands. We were supposed to assault with this? We were supposed to be part of a general offensive that would break the Germans' back. But through the snow, I could see them now, our forces, advancing through the ruins. Not in neat lines like parade grounds, but in clusters, groups, individuals, all moving forward through the storm. Hundreds of them, thousands maybe. Every man who could still walk, still fight, still refuse to surrender this city. "They're not asking us to win," the sergeant said quietly, watching them come. "They're asking us to be part of it. Part of it. Part of something larger than this roof, this warehouse, this moment. Part of the tide that was finally, impossibly turning." A tank appeared through the snow. One of ours, a T-34, its red star barely visible through the white. Then another, then infantry, running low, firing from the hip, advancing through German positions that were collapsing under the weight of artillery and surprise and sheer desperate momentum. "For Stalingrad!" someone screamed below. The cry was picked up, repeated, became a roar that cut through even the storm. "For Stalingrad! For the motherland!" The sergeant looked at us. 4 men and a boy on a roof, surrounded by fire and snow, holding a warehouse full of medical supplies that wounded men needed. Looked at us and seemed to make a decision. "We're not staying here," he said. What? I couldn't have heard him right. "They're pushing through. Everyone's pushing through. We don't hold anymore. We attack." He checked his weapon, found it empty, drew a knife instead. "We're part of this. We're part of the moment the city decided it wouldn't die." It was insane. It was suicidal. It was exactly what Stalingrad had been from the moment we crossed the Volga. The choice to go forward when every rational thought screamed, to go back. "The supplies?" Mikhail said. "Mark the location. Someone will come for them, but we don't hide on a roof when the city is taking itself back." Through the snow, German positions were breaking. I could see them retreating, falling back to secondary positions, trying to form defensive lines that dissolved under the weight of our advance. The tide had turned. After months of being pushed back, of holding ruins by our fingernails, of dying for every meter, the tide had turned. "Well?" the sergeant asked. "You want to watch history or be it?" The Ukrainian boy stood first, 17 years old, shaking with cold and fear and something else now. Something like hope, like rage, like the desperate need to matter. He raised his German pistol. "For Stalingrad," he said, voice cracking but steady. I stood, checked my rifle one last time. 2 bullets, enough for 2 Germans, and after that, I had my hands and my knife and my will to keep moving forward. 2 bullets and faith. That's what Stalingrad had taught us, that sometimes faith was ammunition too. "For Stalingrad," I agreed. We climbed down through the burning warehouse, through smoke that tried to kill us, through heat that blistered our skin. The ground floor was an inferno, but the Germans had pulled back, driven off by the flames and the artillery and the sudden terrible knowledge that they were no longer the hunters. We burst out into the street into chaos that defied description. Soviet infantry was everywhere, pushing through positions the Germans had held for months, overrunning machine gun nests, clearing buildings with grenades and bayonets and bare hands. The snow turned red beneath our boots. Bodies lay in drifts, German, Russian. Sometimes you couldn't tell, sometimes it didn't matter. A German MG-42 opened up from a building to our right. The Ukrainian boy went down, hit in the chest, the pistol flying from his hand. I didn't think. Couldn't think. I fired one of my 2 bullets, missed, fired the second, and the machine gunner slumped over his weapon. I ran to the boy. He was still alive, blood bubbling from his lips, eyes wide with shock and pain, and something that might have been surprise that it hurt this much. "Go," he whispered. "Don't stop. Don't." He died. Right there in the snow, in the middle of the largest battle Stalingrad had seen, surrounded by thousands and completely alone. I wanted to close his eyes, say a prayer, do something to mark his passing. But the tide was moving, and I moved with it, swept forward by momentum and necessity and the knowledge that stopping meant death. We pushed into Factory District B, into ruins so complete that up and down lost meaning. The fighting became vertical, clearing buildings floor by floor, room by room, sometimes fighting hand-to-hand with Germans who were just as exhausted, just as desperate as we were. I used my rifle as a club until it broke, then picked up a German weapon, used it until it ran dry, dropped it, and grabbed another. The snow kept falling, turning everything soft and quiet even as men screamed and died. It was like fighting in a dream, or a nightmare, where nothing was quite real but the pain was absolute. Somewhere in that chaos, I lost track of Mikhail, lost track of the sergeant, lost track of everything except the next door, the next room, the next German who was between me and whatever came after this moment. An explosion threw me through a wall. I felt ribs crack, tasted blood, crawled forward anyway, because stopping wasn't an option anymore. My hands found a grenade, German, Russian, I couldn't tell. Pulled the pin, threw it blind, heard it detonate. I was in a basement. No idea how I'd gotten there. Bodies everywhere. A German officer sat against a wall, trying to hold his intestines in, looking at me with eyes that were past fear, past pain, just exhausted. "Kamerad," he said weakly. "Comrade, the universal surrender. I almost shot him anyway. Almost. But my gun was empty and I was so tired and he was dying. And what difference did it make? I kept moving. The stairs up were blocked with rubble, so I climbed out through a window, pulling myself up with arms that screamed in pain, emerging into a courtyard where Soviet and German soldiers fought with shovels and rifle butts because nobody had ammunition left. This way. Someone grabbed my arm. The sergeant, face black with soot and blood, still alive, still fighting, still refusing to fall. The plaza. They're breaking at the plaza. We ran through ruins that I'd helped defend, past positions where men I'd known had died, toward the sound of concentrated gunfire that meant the Germans were making a stand. The snow was lighter now, visibility improving, and I could see them. A defensive line across the plaza, machine guns and rifles, and desperate men who knew this was their last chance. They said the city would die. The sergeant screamed, not to me, not to anyone specific, but to Stalingrad itself, to the ruins and the rubble and the blood-soaked ground. They said we couldn't hold. But look at us. We made her immortal. And I understood then, in that moment, that my life wasn't mine anymore. I'd given it already. Given it at the Volga crossing, in the factory basement, on the warehouse roof. Given it so many times that I'd stopped noticing. My death was optional, meaningless, already paid for. But my life, what I did with these last minutes or hours or seconds, that still mattered. I charged. So did the sergeant. So did Mikhail, appearing from nowhere, his wounded arm hanging useless, but his good hand gripping an entrenching tool. So did hundreds of others. Thousands, a wave of men who decided that dying here was better than living anywhere else. The Germans fired. We fell. We kept coming. They fired again. We fell. We kept coming. The line broke. Not cleanly, not all at once, but in sections, fragments, Germans throwing down their weapons or running or fighting to the last. We poured through the gaps like water through a cracked dam, unstoppable now, inevitable. I made it to the center of the plaza before the world exploded. The shell hit somewhere to my right. Artillery, our own maybe, theirs, impossible to tell. The blast wave picked me up and threw me like a toy. I had time to see the ground rushing toward me, time to think this is it. Time to feel something like relief that it was finally over. Then rubble was falling on me, around me, burying me in darkness and cold and crushing weight. I couldn't move my legs, couldn't move my arms, could barely breathe under the pressure of concrete and brick and steel that pressed down like the weight of the entire city. But I was still alive. Somewhere above, the battle continued. I could hear it, muffled and distant, like listening from underwater. Explosions, gunfire, screams, the sounds of Stalingrad refusing to die. And in the darkness, buried beneath the city I'd fought for, I smiled. We'd held. Whatever happened next, whatever the cost, we'd held the line. The city stood. And so, somehow, impossibly did we. The darkness closed in. Snow filtered down through gaps in the rubble, cold on my face, gentle as a mother's touch. I closed my eyes and let the city hold me. Silence. That's what I remember most. Not the pain, though that came later, sharp and insistent. Not the fear of being buried alive, though that was there too, lurking at the edges. But the silence. After months of constant noise, of artillery and gunfire and screams and the grinding machinery of war, the silence under the rubble was so profound, it felt sacred. I don't know how long I lay there. Time stopped meaning anything in the darkness. Could have been minutes. Could have been hours. My breath came in shallow gasps. There wasn't room for more, not with the weight pressing down on my chest. Each exhale used up oxygen I couldn't replace. Each inhale brought dust that made me want to cough, but coughing meant using air I didn't have. Stay calm, I told myself. Panic uses oxygen. Stay calm and wait. Wait for what? For rescue. For death. In Stalingrad, they were often the same thing. My right hand could move, just barely. I felt around in the darkness, fingers finding concrete, twisted rebar, something soft that might have been cloth or flesh. The rubble had fallen in a way that created a small pocket around my upper body. Pure luck, the kind that lets some men walk away from direct hits while others die from ricochets. Through a gap somewhere above, I could hear the battle continuing. Closer now, or maybe just clearer. Soviet voices, giving orders, calling for medics, shouting coordinates. We were still pushing, still fighting. The counteroffensive hadn't stopped just because I'd fallen. Good. That thought surprised me. Not self-pity, not fear for myself, but satisfaction that the attack was continuing. When had I stopped thinking about my own survival and started thinking about the battles? When had one soldier's life become less important than the city's refusal to fall? I tried to move my legs. Nothing. Couldn't feel them at all, which was either very bad or meant they were just pinned. I chose to believe pinned. Believing anything else meant accepting I'd never walk again. And a man who can't walk is useless in Stalingrad. Useless men don't last long. Here! Someone's under here! The voice was distant, muffled by rubble. Russian, one of ours. I tried to shout back, but my voice came out as barely a whisper. Tried again. Here. I'm here. Did they hear me? The sounds above changed. Scraping, grunting, the clatter of rubble being moved piece by piece. They'd heard something at least. Whether it was me or just the wind through the ruins, I couldn't tell. Keep digging. I heard something. The weight on my chest shifted slightly. A shaft of gray light penetrated the darkness, and I realized it was snowing again. Fat flakes drifted down through the gap, landing on my face, melting against my skin. Cold, clean. The first clean thing I'd felt in days. More rubble moved. The gap widened. I could see sky now, gray and heavy with clouds, but sky nonetheless. Beautiful. When had I last really looked at the sky? Crossed the Volga staring at our feet? Fought in basements and ruins where ceiling became sky, lived in a vertical world where up and down mattered more than horizon. I see him. There's someone down there. Hands reached through the gap, grabbed my shoulders, started pulling. Pain exploded through my body. Ribs definitely broken, maybe more. I bit down on a scream, tasted blood, let them drag me up through the rubble like being born backwards into a world I'd left behind. They laid me on what had been the plaza. I blinked up at faces I didn't recognize. Fresh troops, probably, brought in during the night assault. Their uniforms were cleaner than ours had ever been. Their eyes hadn't gone dead yet. Can you hear me? A medic leaned over, checking my pupils. What's your name? Name. I had to think about it. Had to reach back through months of being just another soldier, another body, another rifle in the line. I told him. Unit? 13th Guards Rifle Division. His eyebrows rose. You're one of Rodimtsev's men? You've been here since September? Had I? September seemed like another lifetime, another world, a world where men had names and futures and believed they'd live to see another spring. Yes, I said. Your legs? I tried to move them, felt them respond, sluggish, painful. But there, they work. You're lucky. We've pulled out 6 others from this rubble. You're the only one alive. Lucky. That word again. In Stalingrad, luck was measured in strange ways. Lucky to be alive. Lucky to have working legs. Lucky that the rubble fell in a way that left a pocket of air instead of crushing you instantly. They gave me water. I drank it slowly, savoring each mouthful, feeling it wash the dust from my throat. When did water become luxury? When did simply breathing become victory? The attack? I asked. Are we still pushing? The medic nodded. We've taken back most of Factory District B. Germans are falling back to their secondary positions. First time in months they've given ground without us bleeding for every meter. We'd done it. Against every odd, every rational calculation, every assessment that said Stalingrad would fall. We'd held long enough for the counteroffensive to succeed. The city stood, battered, broken, barely recognizable, but standing. I tried to sit up. The medic pushed me back down gently but firmly. You're going to the rear, he said. Medical transport. You've done enough. Done enough. But looking around at the plaza, at the positions we'd just taken, at the Soviet flags flying from buildings that had been German strongholds hours ago, I wondered if anyone in Stalingrad ever did enough. If there wasn't enough that could balance the scales of what this city had demanded. Mikhail appeared through the smoke, still alive, still fighting with that useless arm hanging at his side. He saw me and his face split into a grin that was equal parts relief and exhaustion. Thought you were dead, he said, kneeling beside me. So did I. Sergeant didn't make it. Took a bullet in the plaza right after you went down. I closed my eyes. Another name for the list. Another face that would visit my dreams. The sergeant who'd held us together through the factory basement, through the apartment blocks, through the warehouse siege. Gone in the moment of victory he'd fought so hard to reach. The Ukrainian boy? I asked, though I already knew. No. We sat in silence for a moment. 2 survivors in a city of ghosts, surrounded by the evidence of our impossible victory. They're saying it's the turning point, Mikhail said quietly. That this is when we stopped losing and started winning. That Stalingrad will be remembered as the moment the war changed. I thought about that. Thought about the boys who'd crossed the Volga with us, the ones who didn't make it to the Western Bank. Thought about the sergeant bleeding out against a family photo. Thought about all the small moments of courage and fear and desperate humanity that no historian would ever record. Let them remember it however they want, I said. We know what it cost. Was it worth it? I looked at him, really looked. At his exhausted face, his wounded arm, his eyes that had seen too much. At the city around us, broken but unbowed. At the flags flying in defiance of every prediction, every assessment, every reasonable expectation. Ask me when the war's over, I said finally. He nodded, started to stand, then paused, reached into his pocket and pulled out that piece of paper he'd written on in the apartment block, unfolded it carefully. We were here, he read. Then he looked at me. We were, weren't we? Really here. This really happened. It happened, I confirmed. And we survived it. Not all of us. No, not all of us. The medics came back, started loading me onto a stretcher. I didn't resist. My body had finally caught up with what my mind had known for weeks. I was done. Not dead, but done. The city had taken everything I had to give and somehow let me keep breathing. As they carried me toward the medical transport, I looked back at the plaza, at the rubble that had nearly become my grave, at the positions we'd held with boys and bullets and nothing else, at Stalingrad, refusing to die even as it burned. If the motherland needed proof that men could become walls, I thought, she had it. If she needed proof that walls could bleed and still stand, she had that too. We were the proof, the living and the dead, the ones who crossed the Volga and the ones who never made it back. All of us together, holding a line that shouldn't have held. The transport pulled away, leaving the battle behind. But not really behind. Never really behind. Stalingrad would stay with me. In my dreams, in my silences, in the way I'd flinch at sudden noises for the rest of my life. The city had let me go, but she'd never let me leave. February 2nd, 1943. The date sits in my memory like a gravestone, clean, permanent, marking the end of something that could never truly end. I was in a field hospital east of the Volga when the news came. 3 months since they'd pulled me from the rubble. 3 months of surgeries and infections and fever dreams where I was back in the basement, back in the warehouse, back under the weight of concrete, waiting to die. 3 months of learning to walk again, to hold a spoon without my hands shaking, to sleep without jerking awake at every sound. "It's over," the nurse said, tears streaming down her face. Paulus surrendered. The Sixth Army is done. Stalingrad held. The ward erupted. Men who couldn't walk were trying to stand. Men who hadn't smiled in months were laughing, crying, embracing each other. Someone found a bottle of vodka that had been hidden for exactly this moment. Toasts were made. Songs were sung. I sat on my cot and stared at my hands. They'd given me a medal at some point. I don't remember when, don't remember the ceremony if there was one. It sat in my footlocker with a citation that used words like heroic and exemplary and unwavering devotion. Words that felt like they were describing someone else. Some imaginary soldier who'd done imaginary things in an imaginary city. The real city was still there, just across the river. I could see it sometimes when they let us outside for air. The smoke still rising, the ruins still standing, the outline of buildings that would never be buildings again. From here it looked almost peaceful. Just shapes against the sky, just shadows. They didn't tell you about the silence. After months of constant noise, artillery, gunfire, explosions, the grinding machinery of destruction, the silence was harder to bear than the sound had been. Your ears kept waiting for the next shell, the next burst of machine gun fire. Your body stayed tensed, ready to dive for cover that wasn't needed anymore. At night, I'd wake to absolute quiet and panic, certain something was wrong, that the Germans were sneaking up on us in the darkness. It took minutes sometimes to remember where I was, that the war had moved on, that Stalingrad had become past tense. Mikhail came to see me in late February. He'd stayed with his unit, was being moved west as the front advanced. His arm was still useless, but he'd refused amputation, said he'd rather have a dead arm than no arm at all. I understood. In Stalingrad, we'd learned to hold on to things, even broken things, especially broken things, because letting go felt like surrender. We sat outside the hospital, smoking cigarettes and watching the Volga. The ice was breaking up, great sheets of it cracking and grinding as they moved downstream. It sounded like artillery, distant and continuous. I went back, he said after a long silence, to the factory, to the apartment blocks, to see what was left. And? Nothing. Everything. I don't know. He took a long drag, exhaled slowly. The bodies are still there. Frozen, thousands of them. Ours, theirs, all mixed together. They'll have to wait for spring thaw before they can bury them all. I thought about the Ukrainian boy dying in the snow, the sergeant bleeding out against a family photo, all the others whose names I'd never learned or had forgotten. An entire cemetery scattered across the city, unmarked, unmourned, except in memory. They're talking about rebuilding, Mikhail continued, making it a hero city, monuments, museums, eternal flames, all that. Good. Is it? He looked at me. Will they remember what it really was, or just what they wanted to have been? I didn't have an answer. History was being written already. I could feel it. The official version, where heroic Soviet soldiers defended the motherland with unwavering courage and revolutionary spirit. The version that would appear in textbooks and speeches and propaganda films. That version wasn't wrong, exactly. We had been courageous. We had defended the motherland. But courage in the official version looked different than courage in a basement with no ammunition, no food, no hope. The official version didn't include the dysentery, the friendly fire, the moments when you wanted nothing more than to surrender but couldn't because the man next to you was still fighting. They'll remember what they need to remember, I said finally. We'll remember the rest. He nodded, stubbed out his cigarette. I'm being sent to Ukraine. New offensive starting in spring. Be careful. He laughed, short and bitter. After Stalingrad, everything else is just practice. We embraced, awkwardly, two men who'd seen each other at their worst and somehow still stood. He walked away toward the transport trucks, favoring his bad arm. And I wondered if I'd ever see him again. Wondered if it mattered. We'd already lived a lifetime together in those months. Everything after was epilogue. They discharged me in March. Medical exemption. My ribs hadn't healed right. My lungs were scarred from the smoke. I had shrapnel still embedded in my back that the doctors said was safer to leave than remove. I was done fighting. I thought I'd feel relief. Instead, I felt nothing. Just a vast emptiness where purpose used to be. They offered to send me home, back to my village, back to whatever remained of the life I'd had before. But I couldn't imagine it. Couldn't imagine being around people who hadn't been there, who'd never understand, who'd ask what it was like and expect an answer that fit into words. So I requested permission to stay, to work in Stalingrad. Reconstruction, they called it. I called it penance, or pilgrimage, or maybe just the inability to leave. They assigned me to a recovery team. We went through the ruins systematically, marking the dead, retrieving identification when possible, clearing rubble. Grim work, necessary work. Someone had to do it. In April, we reached the apartment block where we'd fought. The family photo was still there somehow, cracked, faded, but intact. I carefully removed it from the wall, placed it in my pack. Thought maybe I'd find out who they were, tell them their home had mattered, that men had died defending it. But I never did. The trail went cold. The family had probably evacuated, or died in the bombing, or scattered across the country like everyone else. The photo sits in my footlocker still, faces frozen in a moment before the world ended. On May 1st, 1943, I returned to the plaza where the rubble had buried me. It looked different in spring. The snow melted, revealing the full scope of destruction. Every meter of ground showed evidence of battle. Shell casings, shrapnel, dark stains that might have been oil or blood or both. I found a piece of concrete that had come from the building that collapsed on me. Sat on it. took out the half-burned notebook I'd been carrying since September and a pencil stub, and tried to write what had happened. The words wouldn't come. How do you describe drowning in rubble? How do you explain the sound a city makes when it refuses to die? How do you tell someone what it means to survive when survival feels like betrayal of everyone who didn't? In the end, I wrote only this. They called us the defenders, but we were the city herself. They tried to break our walls and found they were breaking against us instead. Stalingrad refused to die, and so did we. It wasn't enough. Could never be enough. But it was all I had. I sat there as the sun set, turning the ruins gold and red, the same colors I remembered from that first morning crossing the Volga. The city was quieter now, but not silent. You could hear reconstruction, hammers, saws, the sound of people building from rubble. Life, insisting on itself despite everything. A wind came up, carrying ash and dust, the eternal smell of Stalingrad. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I was back there, in the basement, on the roof, under the rubble, with all the boys who never left. We held, I whispered to them, to the city, to myself. Whatever it cost, we held. The wind carried my words away. Somewhere in the ruins, I thought I heard an answer. Not words, but something deeper. The heartbeat of a city that had died and refused to stay dead. The breathing of walls that had become men, and men who had become walls. I opened my eyes. The sun touched the horizon, bleeding red across the Volga. Stalingrad burned once. Now she was rising from her ashes. And I, somehow, impossibly, was still here to see it. Still here. Still breathing. Still refusing to fall. If walls could remember, they would whisper our names.